The night Dominic Carver opened his restaurant, 300 people came to watch him win. Renata Solis was not one of the 300. She was there to work. She had been a head judge on the regional culinary circuit for 11 years, and she had learned to spot a man who was performing confidence rather than possessing it within the first 4 minutes of any kitchen walkthrough. Carver had performed it beautifully. The pressed whites, the deliberate walk through the dining room, the way he paused at each table for exactly long enough to be remembered. She took her seat at the judges' panel and uncapped her pen, and she told herself, as she always did, that the food would decide it. The dining room at Carver and Holt was everything the press materials had promised. High ceilings, warm stone, 40 tables dressed in cream linen. The investor crowd filled it wall to wall, money and tailoring, and the quiet, self-satisfied noise of people who had already decided the evening was a success before the first plate arrived. The kitchen pass gleamed under track lighting. The first 2 courses came out without incident, plated precisely, timed well, the kind of cooking that showed a disciplined staff. The 3rd course was where it went wrong. Renata knew it before she lifted the fork. The sauce had broken. Not dramatically, not so that anyone without training would have caught it in the candlelight, but it had broken, the fat separating from the base in a way that left the dish irretrievably flat, like a note played in the right key at the wrong volume. She set the fork down and made a note. Around her, the other panelists ate carefully and said nothing, which was its own kind of verdict. In the kitchen, the same verdict was landing harder. She heard Carver's voice rise before she heard the words. Then the words came through the pass, distinct enough for the nearest tables to register. "I did not ask for your opinion," he said. "I asked you to stay in the corridor." Renata looked up. The man in the gray coverall was standing at the edge of the kitchen entrance. He was broad-shouldered, dark-haired, with the kind of stillness that comes not from nervousness, but from long practice at being in difficult rooms without making them worse. His hands were at his sides. He had said something. She had not caught it, and Carver was looking at him the way a man looks at something he has already categorized and discarded. "There's a fix," the man said. He said it quietly, not to the room, to Carver. 15 minutes and I can pull it back." Dominic Carver looked at his investors. A few of them were watching now. He looked back at the man in the coverall, and something shifted in his face, the specific calibration of a person choosing to make an example rather than solve a problem. It was a decision Renata had seen made before. It was always a mistake. "You're here to check the ventilation on the line," Carver said. "That's what you're here for. So get back to the mop closet, find whatever you're supposed to be fixing, and let the professionals handle the kitchen." The nearest tables heard it. A row of investors heard it. One of them, the woman in the charcoal blazer, set down her wine glass. The room did not go quiet, but it adjusted, the way a room adjusts when something sharp has been said in public and everyone is deciding whether to pretend they missed it. The man in the coverall nodded once. He turned toward the corridor. Renata watched him go. She looked at the broken dish in front of her. She looked at the kitchen pass, where Carver was already smoothing the moment over with a low word to his sous chef, already reperforming confidence for the room. She set down her pen. "A moment," she said. The table went quiet. Renata had been doing this long enough that when she said a moment, people gave her one. "The gentleman in the hallway," she said. "I'd like to hear what his fix is." Carver smiled. It was a careful smile. "Miss Solis, he's our maintenance contact. He handles the hood ventilation and the—" "Yes," Renata said. "I heard what you told him he was. I'd still like to hear what his fix is." There was a silence. It was not a long silence, but it was the kind that has weight. 30 investors felt it. The other panelists felt it. Dominic Carver felt it most of all. He looked from Renata to the corridor door and back, and the calculation behind his eyes was visible to anyone paying attention. He sent someone to get the man. The man in the gray coverall came back. He stood at the kitchen entrance again, and this time the room was paying attention, and he seemed neither more nor less at ease than he'd been before. He looked at Renata, not at Carver. "The fat content in the base is too high for the reduction time," he said. "The sauce broke because it hit temp too fast. I can build a new mount, same flavor profile, corrected ratio. It won't be identical to what he had in mind." He paused. "It'll be cleaner." Renata said, "How long?" 12 minutes. She looked at her watch. She looked at him. "Go ahead." Carver opened his mouth. Renata looked at him, and he closed it. The room leaned forward by a degree it did not notice. What happened in the next 12 minutes was not a performance. That was the thing Renata kept returning to afterward. There was no theater in it, no awareness of the watching room, no glances back toward the investors to see if they were impressed. The man worked the station the way a carpenter works a familiar bench. No wasted motion, no flourish. He pulled from the cold Messie in place with one hand and adjusted the burner with the other, and his eyes stayed on the pot the way eyes stay on something when you have made it many times and know exactly what it is trying to tell you. He tasted once, adjusted once, and did not taste again. That single correction, a pinch, a tilt of the ladle, a half-degree drop in heat, was the kind of move you make when you are not guessing, when you have been here before and you remember what it needs. Around him, the other cooks on the line stepped aside without being asked, not because they were afraid of him, because they could see what they were looking at, and they had been in kitchens long enough to recognize it. At 11 minutes and 40 seconds he plated. He carried it to the pass himself, set it down with both hands, and stepped back. Renata tasted it. She set the fork down, and she was quiet for a moment, and in that moment the entire judge's table was quiet with her. She had tasted that preparation once before. Not the dish was his own, but the mount, the way the acid was layered against the fat, the way the secondary element was folded in rather than whisked, the specific patience of it. She had tasted that approach in exactly one kitchen in 20 years of judging, and that kitchen had belonged to a man named Paul Renner, who had held 2 Michelin stars and who had died of a heart attack in his own restaurant 7 years ago, and whose kitchen had closed the week after the funeral, and whose records, staff, recipes, technique, had scattered. She looked up. "Where did you learn that technique?" she said. The man in the gray coverall looked at her steadily. "From Paul Renner. I cooked in his kitchen for 3 years, before my son was born." The room was very still now, not the adjusted stillness of 30 minutes ago, something quieter and less comfortable for some of the people in it. "Your name," Renata said. "Gabe Muro." She said it back to him, not as a question, just to have said it aloud in the room so that 300 people heard a name they had not walked in knowing. "Gabe Muro." She looked at the plate and then back at him. "This is the cleanest version of that mount I have tasted since his kitchen." She wrote something in her notebook. She drew a line under it and did not write anything else. The investors, as a body, were now looking at Gabe Muro in a way they had not looked at him an hour ago, when he was a pair of gray coveralls moving through the corridor. The woman in the charcoal blazer, Elena Voss, 3 restaurant investments in 4 years, a reputation for knowing when a room was about to reorganize itself, uncrossed her arms. She said nothing yet, but she was watching Gabe, not the kitchen pass, and the 2 colleagues she had arrived with had turned to follow her gaze. Dominic Carver was standing near the kitchen entrance. He had stopped performing confidence because there was no one watching him to perform it for. His sous chef was at the station. His investors were facing the wrong direction. The room that had been arranged around him an hour ago was no longer arranged around him, and he was standing in the gap it left, and he knew it. Renata closed her notebook. "Thank you, Mr. Muro," she said. Gabe Muro nodded. He pulled off the borrowed apron he had taken from the peg by the station, not his, never his, and folded it over the shelf, and he walked out through the kitchen corridor without looking back at the room. In the hallway, a boy was sitting on the floor against the wall with a paperback propped on his knees. 9 years old, dark-haired, wearing sneakers that had seen a lot of pavement. He looked up when the door opened. "Did you fix it, Dad?" Gabe sat down on the floor next to him. "Yeah, bud." He leaned his head back against the wall. "I think I fixed it." They sat there in the hallway for a while, the man and the boy, with the muted sound of the gala on the other side of the door and the fluorescent hum of the corridor above them. Mateo turned a page. Gabe looked at the ceiling. Neither of them said anything, because they had been in enough hallways together that silence between them was not empty. The door opened. Renata Soli stood in the hallway with her notebook in her hand and looked at the two of them on the floor, and something moved through her expression, not pity, nothing near pity, something more like recognition. She had been judging long enough to know what she was seeing. She looked at Gabe. "The woman in the charcoal blazer, Elena Voss, do you know who she is?" Gabe said, "I know what she does." "She'd like to speak with you." He looked at Mateo. Mateo turned another page without looking up, and then, because he was 9 and had been raised by a man who read a room before he entered it, he did look up. "I'll be right here," Mateo said. Gabe got up off the floor. He smoothed the front of his coverall, which was what he had instead of pressed whites, and he went back through the door. Elena Voss was near the kitchen pass, and the two colleagues she had come with were beside her, and none of them were facing the dining room. They were facing the corridor door. Gabe Muro walked toward them and shook Elena Voss's hand, and she held it a beat longer than necessary, the way people hold a hand when they are working out how to say something they already know they want to say. Dominic Carver was at the bar, not entertaining, not performing, standing with a glass he was not drinking from, watching the room that had been his refuse to stay that way. 3 weeks later, Renata drove past the building on her way to a venue across town. The signage above the door had changed. The name Carver and Holt was gone. What was there instead was simpler. A single name, clean and unelaborated, the way a good restaurant's name ought to be when it has nothing to overclaim. A name that did not need to perform anything because the room behind it already knew what it was doing. She slowed at the light and read it twice. Through the window she could see the lunch service moving. Tables full, the kitchen carrying its particular purposeful quiet, the kind that only comes when the person in charge knows what they are doing and has nothing left to prove. And at the window table she could make out a boy with a paperback on his knee and a notebook beside it and sneakers propped on the chair rail, doing homework in the good light, waiting. The light changed. Renata pulled forward. She was already thinking about the line she would open her review with, not the scores, not the adjectives, but the one sentence she needed to say first. She had tasted that technique once before, in a kitchen run by a man who believed the food was the only credential that mattered. She had not expected to taste it again. She was glad she had.